The bucket hit him before the sound did. That was the thing Celeste would remember afterward. Not the water, not the shouting, not the way Marcus flinched in his wheelchair with the particular helplessness of a man who cannot stand up to defend himself. What she would remember was the sequence of it, the arc of the water leaving the bucket, golden in the afternoon light coming through the tall windows of that mansion, and then the sound arriving a half-second later, like an afterthought. Like the violence was so sure of itself, it didn't need the noise to announce it. Celeste was standing in the doorway of the dining room with a lunch tray in her hands. Baked chicken, seasoned rice, and a glass of water with lemon the way he had asked for it. And she watched the water crash over Marcus Whitfield's head and run down his white shirt in rivulets, while his wife, Vanessa, stood over him with the empty bucket and a face that had moved past anger into something colder and more deliberate. "Tell me again," Vanessa said, her voice low and controlled and more frightening for it, "that I'm spending too much money." Marcus said nothing. He sat in the wheelchair with water running off his chin, his hands gripping the armrests, and he said absolutely nothing. And Celeste understood in that moment that this was not the first time, that his silence had the particular shape of a silence that had been practiced, rehearsed, built up over months of absorbing things that had no answer. She set the tray down on the dining table. Her hands were steady. Her face was composed. She had been in difficult houses before. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "should I come back later with his lunch?" Vanessa turned. She looked at Celeste the way you look at something you had temporarily forgotten was in the room, with a flash of irritation and then a rapid recalibration. She was beautiful in the way of someone who had invested heavily in being beautiful, and the investment showed, not warmly but precisely. Yellow dress, heels in a house with marble floors, makeup at 11 in the morning with nowhere to be. "No," Vanessa said. She set the bucket down on the marble floor with a deliberate clang. "Stay. He can eat." She looked back at Marcus. "And you can think about what I said." She walked out of the room. If her heels clicked down the hall and then up the stairs, and then a door closed somewhere above them. Celeste waited until the silence was complete. Then she picked up the tray and carried it to Marcus. She set it on the small table beside his chair without comment. She went to the linen closet in the hallway and brought back 2 clean towels. She handed them to him. He took them without looking at her. "Thank you," he said. His voice was flat, not embarrassed, a past embarrassed. This was the voice of a man who had used up embarrassment a long time ago and was running on something else now, something quieter and harder to name. "The chicken is still warm," Celeste said. He looked at her then. He had eyes that were tired in the deep way. Not the way of a man who hadn't slept, but the way of a man who had been awake through things that should have allowed him to sleep. He was 41 years old, and he looked in that moment like a man carrying a decade he hadn't earned. "How long have you been working here?" he asked. 4 days, Celeste said. He nodded slowly. 4 days. He looked at the food. "I'm sorry you had to see that." "You don't need to apologize for things that aren't yours," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then something shifted in his face. Not a smile, not quite, but the memory of one. "You're not like the others," he said. "What others?" "The other maids. We've had 4 in 8 months. He paused. "They all quit." Celeste said nothing. She understood why they had quit. She was already building the inventory of reasons in her mind. Tony and she had only been here 4 days. To understand the house on Magnolia Drive, you had to understand what it had been before the accident. Marcus Whitfield had built his company, a cybersecurity firm called Fortis, which protected the digital infrastructure of hospitals and school systems across the Southeast, from a single laptop in a rented room in Southwest Atlanta when he was 27 years old. He had grown up in Vine City, the son of a school bus driver named Gerald and a woman named Patricia, who worked the overnight shift at a processing plant and still managed to have breakfast ready when Marcus came downstairs at 7 a.m. He had watched his parents work with the patient consistency of people who understood that dignity was not given, but maintained one morning at a time. And he had carried that understanding into everything he built. By the time he was 38, Fortis had 60 employees, contracts with 4 hospital networks, and a reputation in the industry for both quality and integrity. The house on Magnolia Drive, 6 bedrooms, 4 baths, a back garden that his mother came to visit specifically to sit in, was the physical evidence of what consistency plus intelligence plus the particular fearlessness of a man who had never assumed anything would be handed to him could produce. He had met Vanessa at a fundraising gala for the Atlanta Children's Foundation when he was 36. She was 32. She wore a green dress and had the kind of confidence that filled rooms without effort, and she laughed at his joke about corporate charity events. A slightly risky joke, the kind that required the other person to be sharp enough to catch it, and caught it immediately and made it funnier. He had thought, standing beside her with a glass of sparkling water, that this was a woman who was interested in the world, not just in being observed by it. He had been partly right. She was interested in things, just not, it would turn out, in the same things as him. The marriage was good in the way things are good when two people are busy enough that the distance between them reads as independence rather than absence. Vanessa had her social life, her charity committee work, her regular circle of women whose names Marcus sometimes got confused because he rarely saw them outside of events. He had the company. They met at dinner, at weekends, at the events they attended together, and the meeting was pleasant. And he had believed for 3 years that pleasant was the foundation of something more solid. Then the accident. It happened on a wet October night on I-285, a truck that had no business being in the left lane, a hydroplane that his car could not recover from. He had been on the phone with his operations director when it happened, and the operations director had heard the sound and immediately called emergency services, which was why he survived. He woke up in Grady Memorial with Patricia holding one hand and Gerald holding the other, and the doctor standing at the foot of the bed, with the expression of a man who had delivered this specific sentence enough times to have found the most humane version of it. The injury to your spinal cord was significant, the doctor had said. You're going to need time. Adrian, you're going to need rehabilitation, and I want to be honest with you about the road ahead. The road ahead, it turned out, required a wheelchair. Vanessa had been there. She had cried. She had held his hand and told him they would get through this, and meant it, he believed. Meant it in the way people mean things, when the full weight of them has not yet arrived. The weight arrived over the following weeks, when the meaning met the reality of what caring for a person who could not walk actually required. And Vanessa discovered that she was not fundamentally a person who could absorb that reality without cost. The cost, as it turned out, would be paid by Marcus. Celeste had come to the house on Magnolia Drive through a domestic staffing agency in Buckhead that her cousin had used when she first arrived in Atlanta from Charlotte. She was 24 years old. She had a quiet face and quick hands in the particular quality of attention that the best caregivers possess. The ability to be present in a room without imposing on it, to notice things without advertising the noticing. She had grown up in foster care from the age of 7, moved through 6 homes in 11 years, and had emerged from that system with 3 things that could not be taken from her: a deep faith, a high threshold for difficulty, and an absolute refusal to be defined by what had happened to her. She was not naive about pain. She was, in fact, more fluent in it than most people twice her age. She understood that suffering did not automatically produce wisdom. She had seen plenty of people made meaner by their wounds rather than wiser. But she had decided very young that her own suffering would not go to waste. She had taken the job on Magnolia Drive because it paid well, and because she had learned in 6 foster homes and 2 prior domestic positions that difficult houses were only unbearable if you entered them without a center. She had a center. It was quiet and it was hers, and no amount of Vanessa Whitfield's yellow dresses and empty buckets could reach it. What she had not expected was Marcus, not in a romantic sense, not yet, not for a long time. What she had not expected was his intelligence, the sharpness of it, in the way it surfaced in conversation like something that had been waiting patiently for a reason to appear. He had been reading when she brought his breakfast the 3rd morning, not a novel, but a technical paper on zero trust network architecture. And she had made a comment without thinking about a paragraph she had read something similar to in a cybersecurity magazine in a doctor's waiting room 2 months earlier. And he had looked up at her with the expression of a man who had just received a surprise and was deciding whether to be pleased or unsettled by it. He had been pleased. You read cybersecurity journals in waiting rooms? He had said. I read whatever's available, she said. I don't like wasting time. He had studied her for a moment. What did you make of the zero trust model? I think it assumes competence on the part of users that is often not there, she had said. He had stared at her. Then he had laughed. A real laugh. The kind that arrived without permission, that shook something loose in his chest. It was the first real laugh he had produced in 8 months, and both of them understood this without saying so. From that morning forward, something shifted. Not dramatically, not suddenly. The way light shifts in a room as the sun moves, gradually, continuously, making things visible that were there all along. Vanessa noticed. She called Celeste into the living room on a Thursday evening, 2.5 weeks into the job, with the carefully constructed warmth of a woman who had decided to be strategic. Sit down, she said, with a smile that was doing work that smiles are not supposed to do. Celeste sat. She kept her hands folded in her lap. She kept her face open and neutral, and she waited. You're doing very well here, Vanessa said. Marcus seems comfortable. That's good. That's what we need. Thank you, ma'am. I wanted to talk to you about something personal. Vanessa paused, tilting her head in the manner of someone performing thoughtfulness. I know you want more for yourself. A better position, education maybe, opportunities. She reached into the small bag on the table beside her and produced a folded piece of paper. I have some connections. I could make some calls, get you into a program, maybe even abroad. Celeste looked at the paper. She did not reach for it. That's very kind, she said. May I ask what you need in return? The warmth on Vanessa's face thinned by a degree. She had expected the offer to be accepted first, the question to come later if at all. She recalibrated, reached into the bag again. This time she produced a small white packet, sealed, no label. She set it on the table beside the folded paper. His medications, Vanessa said. He refuses to take them properly. You could put this in his food, just to help him sleep better. Help with the inflammation. He needs it. Celeste looked at the packet. She looked at it for exactly as long as she needed to understand it completely. Then she looked at Vanessa. Why can't you give it to him yourself? She asked. The temperature in the room changed. Because he's stubborn, Vanessa said, and her voice had shed the warmth entirely now. Like a coat dropped in a doorway. Don't be difficult. This is simple. I can't do that, ma'am. Vanessa leaned forward. Her voice dropped to something low and specific. You're 24 years old with no family and no degree, and you work for an agency that will place you wherever I tell them to place you. You will not find another position like this one. She let that land. And if you say anything to my husband about this conversation, I will tell the agency you stole from this house. Celeste sat with this for a moment. She sat with it the way she had learned to sit with hard things. Completely, without flinching away from any part of it. Then she picked up the white packet. She put it in the pocket of her uniform. I'll think about it, she said. Vanessa's lips curved. Good girl. Celeste stood. She walked to the kitchen. She made Marcus his evening tea. She carried it upstairs on a tray with 2 biscuits, and she knocked on his study door, and she went inside. She set the tray down. She took the white packet from her pocket and placed it on the desk beside his iPad. Your wife asked me to put this in your food, she said. I didn't. I won't. But you need to know. Marcus looked at the packet. He looked at it with the eyes of a man whose worst suspicion has just been confirmed not gradually, but in a single instant. His face went through several things in quick succession, and then it went still. The way a room goes still when someone has made a decision. He picked up the packet. Thank you, Celeste, he said. His voice was the quietest she had ever heard it. Here is what Vanessa Whitfield did not know. She did not know that Marcus had been able to take 3 steps in his physical therapy session 11 weeks after the accident. She did not know this because she had attended 2 rehabilitation sessions and then stopped coming, citing schedule conflicts, and had not asked his physical therapist for updates in 4 months. She did not know that those 3 steps had become, over the following weeks, 10 steps, then 20, then the ability to stand at a counter for 40 minutes with a cane and work through a legal document that required his full attention. She did not know this because she had stopped paying attention to Marcus's recovery the same way she had stopped paying attention to Marcus. gradually, then completely, with the particular efficiency of a woman who had decided that the version of him she had married was gone, and the version sitting in the wheelchair was a different and lesser thing. What she believed was that he was paralyzed. What she believed was that he was dependent. What she believed was that she had time. She was wrong on all three counts. The morning after Celeste gave him the packet, Marcus wheeled himself into his study at 6 a.m. and made 3 phone calls before 7. The first was to his lawyer, James Okafor, a quiet, precise man from a family of attorneys who had handled Fortis's legal work since the company's second year, and who answered his personal line before the second ring. "James," Marcus said, "I need divorce papers ready, and I need them ready fast." A pause. "I'll have a draft to you by end of day. I also need to make changes to the will and to the company trust structure. Ruth, Vanessa, is currently listed as a beneficiary in 3 places. I want all 3 revised." "Understood. What prompted this, Marcus?" "She tried to poison me." The silence that followed was the particular silence of a lawyer processing information that has just crossed from the complicated into the criminal. "I need you to call someone for me," Marcus said. "Someone who handles forensic analysis. The packet is sealed. It needs to go to a lab." "I'll make the call in the next 10 minutes, James said. "Marcus, are you safe?" "I'm fine," Marcus said. "I've been fine. I just needed proof." The second call was to his head of security, a former Army MP named Darnell who had worked for Fortis since its 3rd year and who kept a small apartment 2 streets away from the Magnolia Drive house, specifically because Marcus paid him enough to want to be nearby. Darnell answered on the first ring. "I need you to review the last 90 days of footage from every camera on this property," Marcus said. "I need a complete record of my wife's movements in and out of this house. Vehicles, times, any person she has been with." "Yes, sir," Darnell said. He didn't ask why. He never asked why. That was one of the things Marcus valued most about him. The third call was to his operations director at Fortis, a woman named Angela, who had been running the company's day-to-day for the 6 months since the accident, with the quiet competence of someone who had been ready for more responsibility and been grateful for the opportunity to show it. "Angela," Marcus said, "I need to come in. Not as a visit. As CEO, clear my calendar for next Thursday. Full leadership meeting. I'll be there in person." A pause, then, "Yes, sir. It's good to hear your voice like this." "Like what?" "Like you again," she said. He had no response for that. He said goodbye and closed the iPad and sat for a moment in the early morning quiet of his study. The light was coming through the window at the low angle of 6:30 a.m. in September, turning the room warm and gold. He thought about Celeste. Well, he thought about the packet she had placed on his desk. The steadiness of her hand, the directness of her voice, the complete absence of drama or calculation in the way she had delivered a piece of information that could have gotten her fired or worse. He thought about the morning she had quoted a cybersecurity article in a waiting room. He thought about the way she moved through his house, not as though she owned it, not as though she feared it, but as though she was simply doing what needed doing, without performance and without resentment. He had known in the abstract that people like Celeste existed. His mother was one. His father was one in a different key. People who had been given nothing and had decided to make something anyway. Not loudly, not for an audience, just because it was the right thing to do with a life. He had married the wrong kind of person. He understood this now with the clean completeness of a man who has spent a long time not quite looking at something and has finally turned to face it. The forensic lab report came back in 48 hours. The substance in the packet was not medicine. It was a compound that, administered gradually in food over a period of weeks, would produce symptoms consistent with progressive organ failure, fatigue, appetite loss, eventual collapse. It would read on a cursory autopsy as complications from the spinal cord injury. It was not something you ordered online. It was something you obtained from someone who knew what they were doing and what it was for. James Okafor reviewed the report with a private investigator named Vernon Cole, who had 30 years of experience and the specific gift of a man who could follow a money trail the way a hound followed a scent. Vernon spent 6 days reviewing Vanessa's financial records, the ones that were accessible through the forensic accountant James brought in, And what he found was, in its way, a complete portrait. Vanessa had been withdrawing cash from a secondary account, one in her maiden name, opened 8 months ago, 2 months after the accident, in irregular amounts that together totaled just under $40,000 over 6 months. The withdrawals corresponded in their timing with a pattern of outgoing calls to a number registered to a man named Travis Beaumont, a former associate of a known drug distribution network who had reportedly gone independent in recent years and offered, among other services, pharmaceutical compounds of uncertain legality. Vernon presented all of this to Marcus on a Tuesday morning, along with the security footage Darnell had compiled, clear recordings of Vanessa leaving the house on 23 separate occasions, over 90 days entering a black Escalade registered to a man named Curtis Webb, a personal trainer at a gym in Buckhead who appeared in several of the photographs with the ease of someone who had been present in this woman's life for considerably longer than 90 days. Marcus looked at all of it, every page, every photograph, every timestamp. Then he closed the folder. "Schedule the confrontation for Thursday," he said to James. "In the house. I want everything present. The documents, the lab report, the photographs. I want her to see all of it at once." James nodded. "Do you want police present?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Not in the house, but I want them available." Celeste noticed the change in him before she understood it. He was different in the mornings. Sharper, more present, working longer at his desk. He was eating more. He asked her one afternoon while she brought him coffee if she had ever thought about going back to school. She said yes, that she had looked into accounting programs twice, but the timing and the money had never aligned. He nodded and asked her what she thought she would study. She said business, maybe finance, something that gave her language to understand the world the way it actually worked, rather than the way it was described to people who didn't have money. He had looked at her with an expression that was not pity and not charity, and not the complicated thing that sometimes moved across men's faces when they were deciding how to categorize a woman who was smarter than their expectations. It was just recognition, the clean, simple kind. "You'd be good at it," he said. "I know," she said. He almost smiled. "Confidence. Accuracy," she said. Vanessa, during this period, had adopted a performance of reform behavior that was the most elaborate thing Celeste had ever watched unfold in real time. She came downstairs for breakfast instead of having it brought to her room. She asked Marcus how he had slept. She sat with him in the garden for 20 minutes one Sunday afternoon and touched his arm twice in the manner of someone who had watched a tutorial on affectionate gestures. She told Celeste, when in the kitchen one morning, that she was thinking of cooking dinner herself that Friday. "Romantic," Vanessa said, with the bright smile of someone trying on an expression to see how it fit. "Would you like me to shop for anything specific?" Celeste asked. "No," Vanessa said. "I've got it." That evening, Celeste passed the study and heard Marcus on the phone, his voice low and controlled. She did not stop. She did not listen. She went to her room and sat on the edge of her bed and turned the small Bible her last foster mother had given her over in her hands and thought about the packet and the bucket and the photographs and the fact that she was living inside a story that was not finished yet. She thought about what her faith had always told her about justice, that it moved on its own schedule, much that the work of human beings was to stay clean and to stay ready, and that the rest belonged to something larger than any single house on any single street. She slept well. Thursday arrived with the particular quality of a day that knows what it contains. At 4 in the afternoon, James Okafor arrived at the house on Magnolia Drive in a dark gray suit with a briefcase. Vernon Cole arrived 60 seconds later. Darnell was already inside, stationed near the back hall. Marcus was in his study when Celeste heard Vanessa come downstairs, her heels clicking in the familiar rhythm that the house had learned to brace for. "Who are these men?" Vanessa's voice from the foyer. Marcus's voice, calm, from the study doorway. "Come in here, Vanessa. Sit down." Celeste stood near the kitchen entrance, and she had not been asked to be present, and she did not make herself present, but she could hear. "Sit down," Marcus said again, and the second time he said it, it was different. It was the voice of a man who had decided to stop absorbing. She heard Vanessa sit. She heard James begin. She heard the sound of photographs being placed on a table, one by one, each one landing in the silence like a stone dropped into still water. She heard Vanessa's voice change, cycle through its registers, confusion first, then indignation, then the particular pitch of a woman caught who is trying to sprint back to innocence. She heard the lab report read aloud. She heard the withdrawal records. She heard Curtis Webb's name. She did not hear what Vanessa said next because it was quiet, too quiet to carry through the walls. And this was somehow the most frightening thing. The silence where Vanessa's voice should have been defending itself and wasn't. Then she heard Vanessa clearly, suddenly, her composure broken entirely. "She told you. That maid told you." "Celeste gave me the packet you gave her," Marcus said, "because she is a person with integrity, which is more than I can say." The sound that followed was not crying. It was the sound of the architecture of something collapsing. All the planning and the smiling and the performances of the last 3 weeks giving way at once under a weight they had never been strong enough to hold. The divorce papers were on the table before 5 o'clock. Vanessa did not sign them that day. She would sign them 11 days later in James Okafor's office. But after a conversation about the lab report and the word prosecution that reorganized her priorities with remarkable efficiency. She would leave the house on Magnolia Drive on a Thursday morning with 4 suitcases and the particular expression of someone who has lost a game they believe they were winning and cannot yet accept the final score. The warrant for Travis Beaumont came 3 weeks after the lab report was submitted to the Fulton County District Attorney's Office. He was arrested at his home in Decatur at 7 a.m. on a Wednesday. Vanessa's connection to him was documented, and the investigation that followed moved with the methodical thoroughness of a system that, when it finally focuses on the right thing, can be devastatingly complete. The house on Magnolia Drive felt different the morning after Vanessa left. Not lighter. What exactly? Not louder or more colorful or any of the things that houses sometimes feel when something heavy has been removed from them. It felt more like itself, as though a frequency that had been running beneath everything, a low, persistent static that nobody was naming, but everyone was absorbing, had finally stopped. Celeste noticed it when she came downstairs at 6 a.m. to start the coffee. The kitchen was quiet in a way that had texture, that felt intentional. She stood at the counter and listened to the house breathe, and then she made coffee and thought about what came next. She had given 2 weeks' notice to the agency the day before. Not because the job was finished. It wasn't, not entirely. Marcus still had his rehabilitation schedule and his medications and the operational complexity of returning to full leadership of a company. But because the nature of the job had shifted and she needed to understand what she was doing here and why she was staying. She was honest with herself. She had been honest with herself since she was 7 years old, and honesty had been the only currency that held its value. She was staying because of him, not in the way of someone who had decided something. In the way of someone who was paying close attention to a thing they did not yet fully understand, and had decided that the honest response to not fully understanding something was to keep paying attention rather than to name it prematurely and make it into something manageable before it had finished being what it was. Marcus came into the kitchen at 7:15, not in the wheelchair. He came in walking with a cane and the careful deliberateness of a man who had been working on this for months and was still earning each step, but walking, upright, present, moving through his own kitchen under his own power. He wore a plain gray t-shirt and black sweatpants, and his feet were bare on the kitchen floor. Celeste looked at him. He looked at her. "I've been walking for 11 weeks, he said. She turned back to the coffee. She poured 2 cups. She set one on the counter in front of where he would sit. "I figured," she said. He sat down carefully, setting the cane against the counter. "You're not surprised. You stopped needing me to push the wheelchair to the study 3 weeks ago," she said. "You always had an excuse ready. I decided it was your story to tell." He wrapped his hands around the mug. He was quiet for a moment. The good kind of quiet, the kind that is thinking rather than avoiding. "I needed to know," he said finally, "whether she was staying because she loved me or because she expected to inherit something." He paused. "I had the answer by week 6. I kept collecting evidence after that because I needed it to be airtight." And Celeste said, "Did you also need to know what I was made of?" He looked up. "Because I knew you were watching that too," she said. Her voice was not accusatory. It was matter of fact, the voice of a woman who was simply being precise about what she observed. Every conversation in the study, every time you asked about my background, you were doing what you do, gathering information, assessing integrity. She picked up her cup. I don't mind. I'd rather be assessed honestly than trusted blindly. He held her gaze for a long moment. What did you find out? He asked. About me, in your assessment. She considered this seriously, the way she considered everything. That you're a man who built something real out of nothing real, and then watched someone try to take it, and instead of falling apart, you got quiet and got strategic. That you're generous when you trust people and careful when you don't. That you laughed for the first time in months over a comment about zero-trust architecture. She paused. That you have tired eyes that are getting less tired. He was quiet. And that you're lonely, she said. Not the kind that comes from being alone. The kind that comes from being surrounded by the wrong people for too long. He set down his mug. Something had moved in his face. Not the practiced composure she had watched him deploy in the months since she had arrived, but something underneath it. The thing the composure was covering. Which was, she understood now, not sadness, but the specific ache of a man who had stopped expecting to be truly seen. Celeste, he said. I know what you're going to say, she said. Do you? You're going to say something about the situation, the timing, the dynamic. You're going to be careful and appropriate and measured because that's who you are. And you think I'm wrong to be? She thought about this honestly. No, I think you're right to be. I think you should be all of those things. She looked at him. And I think when the time is right, you'll know it, and so will I. He nodded, slowly. The nod of a man who has been offered something he had not been expecting and is deciding whether to trust his own recognition of its value. In the meantime, she said, you have a leadership meeting on Thursday, and your physical therapist thinks you're ready to start weight-bearing exercises. And your mother called yesterday and would like to come for Sunday dinner. He almost smiled. You talked to my mother? She called the house line. You were in your session. We talked for 40 minutes. About what? About you, Celeste said, and about her garden. She has questions about a rose she's trying to save. The smile arrived completely this time. Full, unguarded, the kind that started in his eyes the way his mother's smile started in her eyes. The family resemblance suddenly visible. He looked in that moment not like a man who had been through something terrible, but like a man who had come through it and was standing on the other side taking stock. The warrant for Vanessa came on a Wednesday morning, 6 weeks after she had left the house. Celeste heard about it from James Okafor, who called Marcus's cell phone at 8:15 and spoke for 4 minutes in the measured language of a lawyer delivering news. Marcus listened. He said very little. When he ended the call, he sat at the kitchen table where he had been reading and was quiet for a long time. Celeste brought him coffee. She sat across from him. They arrested her this morning, he said. I know, she said. I heard enough. The DA is pressing charges, conspiracy, attempted poisoning. Travis Beaumont's testimony is apparently comprehensive. He looked at his hands. She's going to prison. The room held this information quietly. I don't feel what I thought I'd feel, he said. What do you feel? He thought about it. Tired, he said, and something else. Something I don't have a word for yet. Relief, she said gently. Mixed with grief, because you did love her, some version of her, or some version of what you thought she was. And you're allowed to grieve that without it meaning anything complicated. He looked at her. My foster mother told me that once, Celeste said. She said the thing people get wrong about grief is thinking it's only for good things lost. Sometimes you grieve the things that turned out to be different from what you believed. That's real grief too. He was quiet for a long moment. And then, tell me about your foster mother. So she did. She told him about the woman named Louise in a house in Charlotte who had been the last and best of the 6, who had given her a Bible and a recipe for sweet potato pie, and the sentence, you are not where you come from. You are where you're going. A sentence Celeste had tested against every hard thing that followed and found, each time, to hold. She told him about the foster system without bitterness and without false peace. Honestly, the way she had taught herself to talk about it. She told him about reading whatever was available, about deciding that education was something she would find a way to. He listened with the full attention she had come to understand was his natural mode, not performing interest, but genuinely inside what she was saying, tracking it, responding to the actual content. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "I want to offer you something," he said, "and I need you to hear it as what it is, not as what it might be confused for." She nodded. "Fortis has an internal scholarship program for staff development, full tuition, fully funded. It was my mother's idea, actually. She suggested it in year 2. He looked at her steadily. "You are not my employee anymore. You gave notice yesterday, but I could bring you on formally as a junior associate in the operations division, which would make you eligible for the program." He paused. "The accounting program you mentioned, or whatever you decide." Celeste sat with this. She sat with it fully and without rushing. "Is this you being careful and appropriate and measured?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "Oh, well, all three." He held her gaze. "And it is also completely sincere." She looked at him. She looked at the man who had built Fortis from a rented room, who had sat in a wheelchair for 8 months, not because he was broken, but because he needed to know who would stay, who had accepted a cup of coffee from a 24-year-old woman with no family and no degree, and had asked her genuinely what she thought about zero-trust architecture. "Okay," she said. "Okay to which part?" "Both," she said, the smile again, the one that started in his eyes. Outside the kitchen window, the September light was doing what September light does in Atlanta, going gold and horizontal, catching the tops of the trees in the back garden, and making everything underneath them look like it had been waiting for exactly this quality of afternoon. Marcus's mother had asked about Sunday dinner. Patricia would come and sit in the garden she loved and bring her questions about the rose she was trying to save, and there would be food on the table and real conversation and the particular warmth of a house that was returning to itself. On a Tuesday 3 weeks later, Celeste walked into the offices of Georgia State University's business school with an application folder that Marcus had helped her assemble and a letter of recommendation from Angela, the operations director at Fortis, who had met Celeste exactly once and produced, in James Okafor's view, the most compelling recommendation letter the firm had ever generated for any purpose. On a Friday 6 months after that, she started her first semester. On a Sunday 2 months after that, when sitting on the back porch with Patricia in the garden that was full of roses because Patricia had insisted on planting them, Marcus sat beside Celeste in the late afternoon and reached over and took her hand without saying anything about it. She let him. Later, much later, when people asked Celeste how it had happened, how a woman with no family and no degree had arrived at a house on Magnolia Drive with a small bag in worn shoes and left eventually as something she had not been when she arrived, she always gave the same answer. She said, "I didn't arrive with nothing. I arrived with everything I had built in silence. I just needed a place where someone could finally see it." And that was true. It was the whole truth, in the way that the truest things are always the simplest ones. The ones that don't require decoration or explanation, but only the willingness to say them plainly and let them stand. The house on Magnolia Drive had been built on wealth, but what made it a home, in the end, had nothing to do with the marble floors or the tall windows or the luxury cars in the driveway. What made it a home was what always makes a home. Two people who had both come through something hard and decided, without pressure and without performance, to come through the next thing together. Roots, as it turned out, can begin anywhere. Even in a house that used to be cold,